All right, hi. This is Andrew Jimenez. Let me get my PowerPoint shared.
And I will say, definitely our first time doing the live event. So
Yeah,
if we
so-
fumble with the sharing, we're working on it.
Yeah, if there's any hiccups, it's Cody's fault.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So I am Andrew Jimenez. Here we go. I'm Andrew Jimenez. There's my Twitter handle. Go ahead, Cody.
I'm Cody Mathis. There's my Twitter handle, Cody Mathis 123.
I guess I'll go through the rest for me, and then I'll let Cody go. So interesting fact about me, I haven't left my home in months. I'm sure that's not actually that interesting because most people probably haven't left their home in months. I have 10 years of IT experience, about 4 years within Config Manager, and my current love is Animal Crossing right now. I'm playing a lot of that.
So fun little fact, I've never met any of my coworkers. I actually started this job at the beginning of this pandemic. So the only person I met in person is Justin, and I joked and said he's not my coworker, he's my boss. And then for experience, I'm just always learning. I'm just about 10 years too, but every day is more experience. And current interest is, well, patching your PCs. I started here at patch my PC pretty recently. So that's kind of what I'm digging into right now.
All right, let's move ahead. Do you want to give the overview, Cody?
Yeah, for sure. So like Justin said, we're going to be presenting on configuration items and baselines. The way I try to describe them or compare them is if you've ever dealt with PowerShell desired state configuration, which you may not have, it's desired state configuration light. The idea being you can set up conditions and you can set up, if you want, in some cases, remediation based on those conditions. So monitoring and remediation, Configuration Manager has its own set of settings that we'll kind of go through. We'll show some examples for some of those, and the other ones we'll just kind of touch base on. And so whether you can remediate will depend on what that setting is. We'll dig more into that. Now, one of the nice components of this, though, the compliance data is stored in the database for Configuration Manager, so you can then act on that data, whether that's building reports or if you want to create collections based off of that compliance. And that's not something you get with, say, group policy. So sometimes you want a little bit more feedback than group policy. Group policy is pretty tried and true. It's been around a long time, but sometimes it's good to know that that setting is set without having to maybe scrape event logs or something. So within the discussion, we've got configuration items and baselines, as well as one other component. So CIs themselves, they're what actually ends up in a baseline. So configuration baselines are comprised of config items, and those can be various things, which we'll go over. And then baselines themselves can contain the items and then also updates or even nested baselines if you want. And the baselines are what you actually deploy. And the last little piece is compliance policies, which very recently in 1910 became very, very useful, and we'll kind of show that later on in the presentation.
Cool. All right, I'll take over for tips and tricks. So some ideas to keep in mind when you're creating configuration items and baselines. Try to think of configuration items. Try to keep them small. Think of them kind of like as functions within like a larger script, because they can be reused within a baseline, and multiple can be used in a baseline, and multiple can be used in multiple baselines. Try to keep them kind of like smaller, like and just let them have one function. That way you can kind of build them up like Lego blocks and use them in many different ways. You can use baselines to group multiple CIs. So you don't need to really build a large individual configuration items. Just use the baseline to make a stack of CIs that do exactly what you want. Because you're going to have a lot of these, make sure you keep organization in mind when you're building them. Naming schemes are very helpful. Make sure you have functional descriptions in them, and you can also assign categories to them within Configuration Manager. Also, something very important to note is configuration items. They have a limited runtime. By default, it's 60 seconds. You can adjust that, but the impact is pretty large because it adjusts the runtime for all configuration items. And things like detection scripts are also configuration items within your applications. So that's also going to increase that time. So just some things to think about when you're making CIs and baselines. I'll actually go over this as well.
Yeah, go for it.
Since I'll be presenting on this right afterwards. So the first one we're going to go over is a script. Script CIs are super powerful because you can basically make them do anything you want. You can use custom scripts using like PowerShell, JScript, or VB script. They allow remediation, and the remediation will also be a script in this case. Again, they're super flexible because you can do anything you want with them. If you can script it, you can do it as long as it fits within that 60-second time frame. All right. So I'm going to show a script CI demo. Let's see. I believe I'm sharing now.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So the first script I'm going to create a script CI here. I'm actually going to create a CI to help me find, with COVID and everything, we have a lot of questions on, well, we have a lot of people installing Zoom as a user-based install, and that's not super manageable. So I'm going to install Zoom right here. I've got the Zoom installer, and I'm going to install this as a user-based app. Bad thing about user-based app is you can't really manage them in a system-wide context, which is what Config Manager is really good at. So there's Zoom, it's installed, and just to show that it's actually a user-based app, I'm going to go into the registry editor and go to HKey current user. And if I go to software, Microsoft, Windows, current version, uninstall, we'll see that Zoom is right there. So we have Zoom now installed under this user profile. And that's not really manageable in terms of configuration manager. Zoom does have an MSI that you can push out to install for the entire system, but you won't be able to push that out unless you know which devices Zoom user base is installed on. So I'm going to make a CI to help us find these Zoom user based installs. I'm going to hop over to my configuration manager client here, and I'm going to under assets and compliance, I'm going to scroll down here to compliance settings and configuration items. I see I have nothing here right now, so let's create a new one.
And there are a lot of options with CIs. We're going to kind of walk through a few different ones. Some of them you might find that you almost never use. So hopefully we can show some of the useful scenarios.
Yeah, and I think this is a useful scenario nowadays, especially because of COVID and everyone installing Zoom by themselves instead of going through something like Configuration Manager. I've seen this question pop up a lot, so hopefully this is helpful for everyone. I'm going to call this Zoom user-based installation detection. And then, of course, I said we need to have good descriptions, so I'll say detects user-based installations of Zoom.
I'll be upfront, mine don't have good descriptions.
I'm only making the description because I said you should. And I'll hit next, and I'll hit next again. All right, so now I'm going to actually make a new configuration item settings. So this is actually the type of thing you want to detect. And again, we're testing a script here, and I'll give it a name, Zoom. And there's like 12 different names and descriptions that you can pop in. So there's like 12 different places where you can put descriptions. Zoom user base install, and the script is going to return actually a string. I actually pre-made the script here, and it's on my desktop.
Yeah, so when it comes to the return types, depending on the setting you're using, which we'll walk through a few of them, the return type is ultimately going to be contextual. If you're writing the script, what that returns and what configuration manager expects is up to you, and the data you're working with. So if you're going to force it to return a Boolean or a string, or maybe it ends up being an array of values or a floating point, you've got to be aware of the data you're returning and then what format configuration manager is expecting it in.
Correct. And so this one, I told it I was going to return a string. You can see that. I'll show this script right here in Notepad++ just so I can zoom it for you guys. So this is going to be basically my detection script for the CI, and it's pretty simple. It's basically, I told it what to search for here. And I use this get child item under HKCU in that reg key that I just showed earlier. So we're going to recurse through all those reg keys and get item property. And we're going to look for the publisher and the display name here. And so this is going to look for display name like Zoom. And it'll spit those back out and throw those into that variable. If that variable is found, if it's not null here, it'll actually spit out installed. And that's what we'll be detecting against. We'll be detecting against this installed value here.
And one thing to note, actually, you see the else statement. With scripts, it's important, if it's not compliant, you should generally still return a value, but not an expected value. And it's just one of the little quirks. So it'll ensure that the remediation runs if you have it enabled.
Right. All right, so I'm going to copy that script there and go back into Configuration Manager. And I'm going to hit add script here on this discovery script because that's all we're looking to do here is actually run a discovery. And this is PowerShell. And I pasted it. And we'll click OK. All right, so now we've done the discovery for this. This actually has to run. I'm going to hit this checkbox here at the bottom. It actually has to run using the logged on user credentials because we want to make sure that it's scanning for that HKCU. And so if it's not running as that user, you're not going to be able to scan against that HKCU. Next, I'll go to compliance rules. So the compliance rules are basically going to tell us whether or not the value returned is compliant. So now we're actually defining what compliance means in this situation. So we're going to look for Zoom is installed. So we're looking for that installed return on this in this particular case. So I'm going to say installed. And this is going to match basically this right here. This is what we're expecting. In fact, I like to copy it and paste it in here just so I make sure I get exactly what's going to be returned. I'm also going to report non-compliance if it's not found. That means if it returns null, I'm going to say that's also not compliant. It shouldn't return null because we have an if-else, but with software, you never know, man. And then you can also have some severity assigned to the non-compliance when it gets returned. I like to do information, but you can also make it critical and have certain things trigger off that if it becomes critical.
Yeah, critical with event even. We'll put something in the event log on the endpoint, I believe, and then you'll get you can see those in Configuration Manager too.
Awesome. So that's actually really it for like the creation of the CI. We've got the settings here that we just made, and if I click next, and of course my window's too small to actually see the next button. And again, we have the Zoom is installed. So this is the compliance rule that we made as well. You can also, so you can make the setting and the rule separately, and it would go through here as well. And next one more time, and we'll go through and it should be created. So now I've created the compliance rule, but it's not assigned to anything. It's not actually working at all right now. It just exists. So here's our compliance item. It gives you all the information here again. You can, and since I mentioned categories, you can actually categorize it here. We can say this is a client-based one. So now it's got a little category, and we can right-click and show the categories for it. That's super helpful if you're diligent. You can actually categorize everything and basically split everything up into different groups. Especially when you get hundreds of these, it actually makes life a lot easier. Next, I'll go to configuration baselines. This is how a configuration baseline is basically how we assigned that configuration item to a set of clients. And you can always do multiple CIs in a baseline, and you can assign you can make multiple baselines with multiple CIs. So I'm going to say Zoom user-based install. And I'm going to actually add the configuration items that I want here. You can see here that you actually have 3 options. You can do configuration items, software updates, and you can do other configuration baselines. So you can have configuration baselines of baselines. And I'm going to choose this one and add. So this user-based install is the only configuration item we're going to be assigning for right now. We'll click OK. All right, so now we've created the configuration baseline. We've created the group of configuration items. Now it's time to actually assign it to some devices and see what they return. You do that by deploying it kind of like you do an application. So you see here, we've selected the configuration baseline. We don't have any remediation, so we're not going to click remediate here, but we do need to assign it to a collection. So we'll hit device collections. I'm going to do device collections, and I'll just do all of our desktop and server clients. There's only two. It's the server and the client that I showed earlier. I want this to run fairly often, so I'll say 10 minutes here. Just be careful because if you run it too often, like your users will notice, especially if it's something more intensive, because this is a script that's going to run in the background every 10 minutes. And I'll click OK, and it's now deployed. So now let's actually head over to the client. Baselines are brought in via machine policy, so I'm going to run a machine policy retrieval right now. And then we should end up seeing here in this configurations. I'll spam refresh and see it when it shows up. Any second now. While we wait.
I did see a couple questions we could kind of chat about.
Okay, yeah, cool.
So one of them was Garth. He asked if baselines have a 60-second timeout or if the CIs themselves do. So each CI independently is going to have a 60-second timeout. So you could have a configuration baseline with 30 CIs that could potentially be running for up to 30 minutes, right? And something to keep in mind too is it's kind of like a software update timeout. Just because there's a timeout on the CI, it's not going to kill the process. It's not going to stop the thread. It's just going to stop caring. It's going to stop monitoring it. So regardless of what your CI returns after 60 seconds, it's going to probably show error. You're going to see an error state for your CI or your baseline. Now, if you run it again and it happened to complete its work, and it will run again. And let's say that the detection's pretty fast, but your remediation is slow. So you could actually have a follow-up run of a long running CI, and maybe that initial run, the remediation does work, it just takes a while. Follow-up run, detection's quick, you get compliance. So it's something to consider if maybe that works for some scenarios. And then also just looking into extending it. I've seen a little bit of back and forth on whether or not it's supported to extend the CI detection. I do know there's a lot of posts out there on how to do it.
I've extended it before.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now we actually see it here. Let me see if it's ran yet. So it hasn't run yet, but you can actually click this evaluate button and have it run immediately. So it'll evaluate and it comes back pretty quick as compliant. The nice thing here, you can click view report and see exactly what happened. And so it brings up a nice little internet browser window that gives you a nice pretty green compliant there, and it tells you each individual CI. This is also one of the reasons why you might want to keep those CIs separate. You'll actually see each individual CI here and see whether or not it's compliant. So if you have all your individual CIs, you can see why a single CI came, or why the entire baseline came back as non-compliant, and you can see exactly which CI is coming back as not compliant. So it makes troubleshooting a lot easier as well. So this one came back as compliant, which means Zoom user base is installed. Now that that's come back as compliant, I'm going to actually go back to the server, and I'm going to click on the baseline, and I'm going to click on the deployment here, and I'm going to right click it. And I'm actually going to make a collection based on this, on whether or not it's compliant. And what this will do is any devices that come back as compliant will actually end up in this collection. Here you can see it's just basically the regular collection rules. It's a query rule here. Do not choose incremental here because that's really going to slow your system down, because every time it comes back, it's going to actually rerun this query. So I'm going to do 7 days for now. We can force update the membership if we need to. I'll click next. And so this is going to make a collection based on whether or not Zoom user base is installed. So let's go back up to device collections here. And we have our Zoom user base install, and it's still updating. And we see now that there's one device in it. And that device should be my demo 3 client here. And then I'm actually going to choose, I don't really want this user base install to be on there anymore. And so the real world like use case for this is I'm going to go ahead and deploy the machine-based installer for it. So let's go to deploy, application, browse, Zoom meetings. So this is the machine-based installer for Zoom. And I'm just going to go ahead and deploy that right now. Required. Install, required. And you know what? You're getting it as soon as I say so. Actually, I don't want the toast notification. All right, so now that's going out. Go back to demo 3 client, and I'm going to run machine policy again, so it actually runs this install pretty quickly. And I still have this registry open, so we'll actually see the machine policy, the machine base install run, and it'll actually kill this user base install. Not all apps do this, or they'll clean up the user base install when the machine base install happens, but Zoom is one of them. Google Chrome's another one. There you are. All right, so it's installing now. We'll see that old Zoom go away. New Zoom's installed. And so now we have the machine-based Zoom that's taken over for the user-based Zoom. And now, if we're lucky, if I run this the CI one more time, we should come back as non-compliant. So now it's actually non-compliant because the user-based Zoom is gone, the machine-based Zoom is installed, and I'll actually have to go back down in here, and we can actually update the collection as well. But first, I'm gonna have to actually. I think I have to run a. Actually, Cody might know this more than I do. Do I have to run a summarization before it updates the collection? There we go. So we've got non-compliance count 2. And
I'm
we'll
muted, sorry. Yes, you will want to do a summarization.
Yeah. So
and one thing to mention around compliance and non-compliance here, and we'll kind of touch base on it a little later on the importance, but it can be valuable to be careful around what returns compliance and non-compliance. So in this scenario, what might make a little more sense is if your goal is to get rid of Zoom user install, having it installed, Zoom user install found would actually be non-compliant, and then having it not found might be compliant because your desired state is for it to not be there.
True. As with everything in SCCM, there's about 12 different ways to do it.
Yeah, so another good question here. This one might be good for you, Cody, as well. Do you know how the 7-day schedule is spread out? Most computers run in the first 36 hours, it seems, but want it an even spread.
I've seen something kind of similar, especially for the first run. You know, I've definitely seen the first run of any CI. If it's set to like some lengthy schedule, it seems to happen pretty fast on the first go around. So I know the randomization isn't quite like the client upgrade where it's a randomized scheduled task that is somewhat evenly distributed. So I don't know why that it like, I guess I'd say just subsequent runs have the same issue. When I've ran into that, I've only seen my initial run be a little less staggered than I expected. So if you're seeing that your 7-day or 14-day spread for a baseline is always sort of very short and not what you'd expect, that might even be something to submit a frown for.
And so now I've refreshed the collection, and you'll see that now that collection actually is empty now because I don't have any Zoom user-based installs anymore. And so now with that CI running, with that baseline running all the time, and this machine machine installer going out to that collection all the time, anytime a system decides to pop into that collection, it's going to get the user-based installation removed, and the machine-based install is going to replace it. That's it for me. I'll hand it back over to Cody. Actually, I think I need to do the slides first, or are you going to go straight to sharing?
We've got a continuation of more scripting. So let me share out my screen.
I'll go ahead and stop sharing and you can share.
So what I have is some scripts that I want to share out that as soon as I get the right screen sharing. So I've got a couple examples I want to show. The first example that I was hoping to show off, it's another script, and this one includes some remediation. So within the assets and compliance area, we're going to again go down to configuration items. And in here, let me make this full screen now, and hopefully I'll figure out how to exit it. It's pinned. Stay there, I don't want to lose that. So kind of a necessary evil sometimes. So I think most of us, or a lot of us, at some point have had to manage hosts files, whether you were willingly did it or not. And what we have here, and I'm not going to walk through the full creation of it just because it's only so exciting. So we have a host file here that I want to add a line to. And in this case, I'm trying to add for a line here to my host file, vsmug.patchmypc.com, with an IP address. And I want to append this to the host file if it's not found. And if it is found, then I'm compliant. So all of that same sort of components are here. We've got our script. This one also has our optional remediation script. And it's similar to the detection script, except it has actions that it will actually do. We're not checking to run as logged on user because you need at least administrative privilege to manage the host file. And within here, I have the compliance rule, return compliant equals compliant, run our remediation. You can selectively choose this based on your business use case. And what I have with this, within the relationships tab, there's a few ways to kind of navigate around. So Andrew kind of mentioned it. It's good to create sort of small functional CIs and then use them in baselines sort of in an intelligent way so that you can build them up. You've got building blocks. And when you start to do that, what can be helpful to figure out where everything is at is this relationships tab. So I've actually got my baselines that reference the CI, and I already have one. I've got my VSMUG PMP hosts.
While we're looking at this, Cody, while you're bringing that up, we had a question. Can you speak to best practices for custom logging when using CI? So any recommendations on like how you should log out, any checking and or remediation when using scripts?
I've done system-based ones where the logging was done to the event log, and then that gets scraped by your organization's SCCM, and then it can be centralized. I've also gotten a little bit more creative and written things out in the user context, and that gets scraped by hardware inventory to again be reportable. So it depends on what the CI is. Sometimes compliant or non-compliant is sufficient. Other times you do want that extra granularity. I've seen organizations write standard modules that are approved, signed, and on every single workstation, and those include logging functions. So it depends on what your organization is able to build up and what level of granularity you need. There are built-in reports that will show you that sort of compliance and non-compliance information. So we have our baseline here. I've got my evaluation condition, and we'll talk about some of this other stuff in just a minute here. This purpose field is actually really useful. It's another one of those things I don't see it get used as much as it should. So I want to touch on that one because it's really useful. So I have my deployment, just targeting a device. And I'm going to allow remediation. Whether or not that's allowed outside of a maintenance window is completely up to you. Simple schedule, 7 days. And then I have my client here. So as of this moment, I do not have the value here. I will say it says compliant, but that's because I made sure this worked. So this is actually not compliant right now. If I were to flip it to monitoring, we would be able to validate that. This report is likely going to show Edge, right? That's what we're supposed to use. Yeah, so this is going to show compliant, and that's because you can see right here, the last run, I had remediated it. Here's my remediated rules 1. So what I'm going to do, though, we can see that this file was just opened and it does not have the data. We're going to evaluate that. We can see that the evaluation time just updated. We can see that it's compliant again. Now we have that remediated rules 1 returns compliant. So you get the rule name, the description, and this is definitely why this is valuable to have. Basic info, what you're expecting and what you got. And then if I go and I open up my host file again, we'll see that that entry was appended to the end of my host file. So maybe not something anyone ever wants to admit they had to do, but I've seen definitely in some sort of small shop DMZs or even large shop DMZs, there's not DNS or any way of centrally managing things, and in a pinch, this has helped. So the next thing I wanted to show, though, with regards to scripts. So what I have here is sort of configuration, right? Alluded to this being like desired state configuration. What I am hoping to do is configure WSUS in order to either resolve or prevent some common pitfalls. And so all these will be available later today, assuming all goes well. And what we have here are some fun little CIs. These are all script based. And you'll see right here, this actually says application. If we look at some of those other ones, you can set operating system, right? So there's a little bit of a difference here. And that difference is actually, if we go to create a CI, and we'll walk through one of these too, I'll just show what the creation looks like because it's a little different. There's this little checkbox here. It's a beautiful name. Do as I say, not as I do. And within here, right, there's this funny one. So the interesting part about this checkbox, what I've seen is it's useful to actually use this regardless. So maybe you are only doing an operating system CI. You don't have any conditions on whether or not it runs. You always want it to run. You can still create this application-based one. Check this box. The reason you might do that is you can change this after the fact. What you cannot do is change a CI from operating system-based to a application-based or vice versa. So if you start off with this, it can be valuable just to allow you the flexibility and not have to recreate a CI. So some of the application settings, you can use an MSI. So you might actually make it so that the CI is only applicable if you find that product code. You can actually browse all of your specific applications and deployment types. And the one I commonly use is use a custom script for detection. And the way this works is it actually runs just like any of the other PowerShell scripts or VB script or JScript. It'll end up running, and it actually is a CI on the database, and on the client, this will be a CI. If it returns anything at all, standard out, no error, and it returns something, just an object, then it's considered applicable, so to speak. And I'll show you the use cases for something like this. So, no, I won't, Siri. And so what we have here, here's my detection method. And like I said, we can change it. This is really useful. Now, if I go here, just to show this, and I go to the properties of my operating system type, I can't change that, right? I can change my supported platform. So maybe this is the only condition you're concerned with. It might be okay to just leave operating system. But here, I've got a lot more flexibility. And so I have a PowerShell script here. What it's really doing is just checking for IIS. So I'm trying to wrap everything in try-catch, and more or less the hope is I want to make sure IIS is installed. And I also want to make sure that WSUS is installed, because what I'm doing with this right here is I'm trying to resolve a common issue that we'll see around WSUS, where the content, this content virtual directory in IIS, it will have custom authentication set up, and that can cause some issues. The simplest way is to just allow what you end up setting up is the application pool does the authentication. And so this CI makes sure that happens. So the network service is the default user for the app pool for WSUS. This is just going to set that up. It's going to make sure that our content directory does not have any user specified. It uses the service. Compliance rules.
Are we going to show this the IIS side of this, Cody, when it remediates? Or
absolutely, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. So we can do that. So that's just one of the CIs. I've got a handful of other ones. I've got the WSUS content path. Just another pitfall we'll see where There's certain cases where if you run post install for WSUS, specifically with like leading slashes on a UNC path, it will not translate properly in the IIS site. You'll see it appropriately in the registry and in the database, but IIS will actually have no leading slashes. It'll break your content directory. This makes sure that the registry matches what's in, IIS matches what's in the registry. So again, very similar in the sense that it's just a script. It runs, it checks the value, and it remediates it if it can. I'm expecting Booleans. And the theme kind of continues. I've got IIS login configuration. I've got configuring LEDBAT automatically to identify the ports and make sure LEDBAT is set up, and even some other ones just to make sure the WSUS service is running and the app pool should be started. I mean, we all know how stable WSUS is, but I like to have a little bit of a check here. And I have some other fun ones too. If you've ever set up SSL on a WSUS box, it's not too bad. But when you have, let's say you're standing up 5 new ones, it's not fun to do. And so what I did here was, again, a whole set of scripts. And this, do as I say, not as I do again. These probably could be broken out. It's debatable. These have a very specific function. I'm editing IIS websites. And what I'm going in here and trying to do is specifically setting the SSL flags to whether they should be configured for SSL or whether they should not be configured for SSL. And that's just based on Microsoft Docs. And so this all the way through is going to configure them. And I've seen customers where the console, what they'll do is they'll set all of the apps and virtual directories in WSUS to SSL, and that will not work. By default, and I don't think you can change it, honestly, the content lookups all are going to occur over HTTP. So is some of the other components like the reporting web service. So I have these contained within a configuration baseline. And the application component really kind of shines right here. So if you select one of these that says operating system, you can't change the purpose, right? It's always evaluated. The only time it might not be is if the operating system was not met, you know. But now we have an application type. The purpose is optional, and I've changed that. I can make it required, optional, or prohibited. Now, optional means that it's not going to affect the compliance if the device doesn't meet the detection. And we'll see that when I run the baseline here. And then, so the opposite, of course, with prohibited is interesting. That can, depending on what you're doing, reduce the number of CIs you need. So you might have some of your clients where you want this component to be compliant. Let's say we'll go back to the host file. It kind of applies here. You deploy out this host file config and you want it to return compliant on these 7 web servers in the DMZ. But what you also want to ensure is these other 12 web servers do not have it. And so you can deploy out the same CI, but in one of your baselines, it's going to be prohibited, and in the other one, it's going to be required. So that's another way to kind of leverage these application-based ones. And you can change the revisions too. I've typically always used latest, but this is going to let you kind of play around with things. Maybe you've got a stable baseline revision that's working, and then you're doing some testing. So this is one way to do a little testing, is using these revisions. So this is an environment where I have this CI deployed. So I will say right now, everything is compliant. So, and I have some other CIs that I didn't show, and these are from Sherry Kissinger. So I don't know that I'll end up putting these in the GitHub. We might link to them in the slide deck. I've manipulated some of them, a couple of them. I think one of them, I just had to make it return a value because it was not, little things like that. But in terms of the other ones, like LEDBAT, and I've got some other components here too. So the firewall configuration for WSUS, I'm automatically making sure the firewall ports are open. I'm automatically doing IIS log cleanup to only retain 7 days, things like that. So what I want to do, as Justin mentioned, is let's go break something.
While we're breaking that, quick question. So we had a question in the window. Why does viewing the report require UAC? Do you know that the answer to that is because based on where it spits it out is like system level, or do you have any idea on that, Cody?
So I have a little bit of an idea, and I actually played with it for a good little while. I wanted to make it so that I wanted to get it remotely. And I found the method on the COM object to generate the detailed report. And what it actually takes is a user SID. And from my understanding, I don't know if it's impersonation or what, but so the data, grabbing the data out of WMI requires elevation. But especially because they can be user-based, though, you end up needing the SID, right? You're grabbing data relating to a specific user. And so I haven't been able to get the method to work remotely because I wanted to invoke this remotely, grab the HTML file, and then be able to grab that report because it's really nice. All of that data I don't think is quite available in the database, not to that level. And if it is, it's not exposed very nicely. So that UAC I think is just because of the impersonation and getting all the data that it needs to get. Oh, is this going to make me valid? Yeah, it is. It was real info, huh? So if anybody has been able to generate that report with the COM object remotely or even locally, if you can do it with PowerShell, I'd be very interested, because I have so far been unable to do that. Now I can get compliance with PowerShell. I can get compliant, non-compliant error. I can invoke baselines and do all kinds of fun stuff, but I've not been able to get that report. Yes, I know they don't. Okay, there we go. So now I've broken IIS. I've broken WSUS. I've broken the virtual directory here. So I've specified a specific user. So we want this, and the reason we want this is because the app pool for WSUS runs as the network service, and in a typical config, the network service ends up having all the permissions needed to manage content in that directory. So, and then while we're at it, let's do this as well. Let's require SSL, which again, you shouldn't do that. We're going to evaluate this baseline. Now, this is actually going to be a pretty a decent example of how we mentioned there is a limit per CI, but the baseline itself doesn't necessarily have that limit. So if we look at that report, there's a lot here. You know, I've got quite a few CIs, including installing Windows features. You know, so I've got these Windows features CIs where I'm installing all of the necessary Windows features one by one, and those definitely will time out if they need to be installed. So that's expected. Now they're compliant now because the work is complete. And sometimes you can get creative. So what I've actually done, and I won't go into too much detail, I'm just kind of waiting for this CI, so I'm rambling. Let's see here. Yeah, it's going to take a minute. So what I've actually done, because I'm doing a lot of feature installations, like back to back, querying for features is a little resource intensive, especially if you're doing it somewhat frequently. And so what I was doing was caching locally in JSON the installation state of all of the Windows features. And so this is just kind of showing that you can get pretty creative with CIs and kind of work with them however you need to work with them. So I'm jumping out JSON, and then in my script, what I'm doing is setting like a threshold. So when all my Windows features bits here run, instead of having to check the entire feature set for IIS over and over and over, you know, for all the different components, the first time one of them runs, it gets a full list of all of the installed CIs. I'm sorry, all of the installed features. I dump them out to JSON, and then with that timestamp, I put a trust value. If it's been ran within the past 2 hours, I'm going to believe it. And then after I go in and make the adjustment, let's say I install it, I'm going to go update that JSON. So that way, I'm able to do the query for Windows features less often. There we go. So we can see that it finished at 9:57. We can view report. And what we should see is, here's SSL. Oh, it's not an SSL box, so that didn't actually fix it. But the content in on off one, is it assigned to here? Application pool. Here it is. Let me see if it fixed it. Wow. No. So I will say the SSL one did not evaluate, and the reason that that one did not evaluate was because of the condition on it.
So while you're looking at that, is there a way to disable CI logging in the database? For certain CIs had a bad experience where the database grew exponentially. Root cause was CIs. Any thoughts on that?
You might be able to change some of the retention history. Yeah, they can be a little chatty for sure. I don't know offhand on that one, honestly.
Okay, cool.
So the WSUS SSL configuration, that didn't actually edit it, and that's because it wasn't applicable. I'm only manipulating those if it's an SSL WSUS server. Now, I don't know offhand why this didn't work. We can check real quick. We'll just run it and see if it fixes it. It might just be something that I forgot to set.
And just a reminder, so we have got quite a few about asking about where they can download these scripts. So they're all going to be available on the GitHub repro that we have. So it's going to be vsmug.com/GitHub. So any of the examples will be exported to a zip file, and then you can import all these CIs and baselines.
Yep. And they'll work when I do it. Yeah, so I probably just have a little typo in here somewhere, but so the idea being it'll resolve these, which is really convenient when you're starting to manage some of these servers at scale. And as an example for managing, you know, I've got the same theme kind of for all the different roles, even if it's just little things. So if I want to go in and make sure that I've got archive logging on my management point, or I want to take my site server and manage the max.mif file, maybe you've got HA set up, and you want to make sure that the max.mif file size is consistent across all of your SMS providers. Or maybe you want to make sure you manage no SMS on drive. You've got a standard drive scheme, and that every drive has it except the D drive. Make sure archive log is enabled, all that sort of stuff. Managing max memory on your SQL instances to whatever works for your environment. Maybe your standard is that 80% of memory is dedicated to SQL. So that sort of thing. So that's pretty much what I have here for this demo of scripts. I think at this point we'll move back over to Andrew. I want to say that we've got some registry ones we want to take a look at.
Yep. So the next CI type we're going to go over is registry. There's two registry type CIs. There's registry keys. There's no remediation available on registry keys. I'd really love to know why. They can validate the existence or non-existence of a key.
You want to share that out, Andrew?
On the registry key. Oh, am I not sharing that? I'm sorry. There we go. No, thank you. I thought I clicked share and Teams had a pop-up saying, "Are you sure you want to share?" Anyway, so yeah, so we've got the registry keys. There's no remediation on the registry key. They validate the existence or non-existence of that key or the ACLs on the key. Again, I'd love to know why that we can't remediate those. Or registry values, where you can set a set a registry value within a specified hive and key. Registry values do allow remediation, and I'm going to just hop right back into another demo on, and I'll show the registry keys. Or actually, I'm going to show a registry value in action. So I'll stop sharing, and then I'll reshare. And I'm actually sharing now, right?
Yes, yeah, you are.
Sweet. All right, so let's go back into compliance items. The registry key I'm going to show this time is actually going to be one that we run into a lot of at Patch My PC. This one is for and it's not really needed as often nowadays, but I actually needed it last week for someone running an old SCCM. Where is it? Policies, Microsoft, Windows Update. This accept trusted publisher certs. Now this allows you to enable third-party patching and allows you to basically install updates from certificates that aren't Windows or aren't Microsoft. So this has to be set to 1 if you want third-party patching to work. And sometimes the client CI just doesn't, or the client setting just doesn't set it. And sometimes people are running old versions of Config Manager and it doesn't get set. So I'm going to actually create a CI to make sure this thing works. And this thing is always set to 1 as a D word. So back over to here, I'm going to create a new configuration item.
And the D word part's very important. We actually had a customer who was transitioning between configuration manager environments, and they were trying to do some sort of staged transition. As part of that, they were setting some of those settings, like the trusted publisher's registry entry, and then disable dual scan, just a few things that sometimes the local policy from the configuration manager client manages, and they were using a string value. And so at first glance, it looked like it was applying, but the value itself was a string. And the configuration manager, or sorry, the Windows Update agent just didn't, it didn't see the value it was expecting.
All right, so here we go. I've got this. You know what might make my life easier is if I just move the bar. Aha. All right. So I'm going to create
your feet.
So I'm going to hit new here. And I'm going to actually create this, and it's going to be registry value. So accept trusted publisher. And actually, it's actually got a nice browse button for me right here. But this one isn't. So for D words, you actually choose integer, and it gives you this nice little reg D word button right here. And I'll hit browse, and I'll browse to that one real quick. HQ local machine, software, policies. I always forget where it is. Microsoft.
Yeah, quick
Windows.
tip here. If you do a remote machine, I think we do need to make sure a remote registry is running on the remote. So that's something to note. Like if you had a key that you wanted to evaluate, but it's a remote machine, you might have to start that service up if it isn't by default.
And you can use a CI to start that service up, maybe.
Yeah, maybe Cody will be nice enough to include a CI example in the export.
I actually already have one. It's in my site system folder, so that's already all set.
All right, cool.
So, and the nice thing about going through this browse is you can actually click the one you want and say, hey, it needs to exist, and this registry key needs to equal 1, or registry value needs to equal 1. So that actually, doing that actually creates the entire thing for me and shows that it must exist, it must equal 1. And actually, I want to go in here and say, hey, remediate this if it's not compliant, and remediate this. Oh, I don't know if you can remediate this. You can't remediate existence.
No, you cannot. It's implied.
Oh, okay. And while we're doing this, I'm going to actually show this new feature this was in 2002, right, Cody?
Yes, it's in 2002.
We're going to track the remediation history when supported. So this checkbox is new, and it actually sends back reports on any time it basically remediates these settings. So I'm going to click apply here.
And it has a bug.
Yes, and just to note, there is a bug if you deploy this out on a co-managed, or you check the box for co-managed for that's in the baseline. Yeah, it will not work. So don't check it
does
for
not
co-managed.
appear. Yeah, so it's a known bug, which is good. I put it out on Twitter, and we immediately had some gentlemen reach out and just, that doesn't work. Known bug, but the good news is it's documented, and hopefully that'll get fixed here soon enough, because this is a very cool feature.
It's a very cool feature. So I'll show that feature too when we actually apply this baseline. So I'm going to call this accept trusted publisher equals 1. And I'm going to add that CI. And so basically, if you check this box as well, when you have the tracking on, it won't work on co-managed clients. I don't think we've tested it on non-co-managed clients with this box checked, but I'm not going to test that right now. And I'll click OK. And so we created the baseline there. I'm going to deploy it out now. And I will deploy it to that same collection for everything. And I'm going to remediate, and I'm also going to allow remediation outside the maintenance window just so it remediates immediately for me. I'll keep it at 7 days for now. I'm going to run it manually anyway, and click OK. So right now it's actually should come back if I hop over to the client and run a machine policy. It should show up shortly. You see we have it here now. It's set to 1, so it should come back as compliant at this time. Refresh. I'll keep the registry window open, and by the time I start talking about something else, it'll show up on me. That's how it always happens. Any questions that have popped up while we're waiting for machine policy to happen?
Which log files would we look at when troubleshooting CIs or baselines?
That's putting me on the spot. I would go to docs.microsoft.com.
Yeah, I know there's
I can speak to a little bit of it while we look it up. One thing that's interesting is when we were creating those application-based CIs and those scripts I'm writing and putting in there, those will show up in app discovery .log. And, because applications are largely CIs with content, and the detections, those application-based bits are CIs, and that are very similar, and they end up in the app discovery.log. You'll see them getting executed. So there's download.
CI task manager. Oh, so that's how you can learn about the scheduling when things actually occur. DCM agent, that's what it is. So DCM agent's the real the big one, I think. I think this does it's running, it returned with this error, stuff like that. And then if you really need to dig into it, you got the WMI provider.
Yep.
And the reporting.
So within right WMI, what's interesting is you can see pretty much all of the logic that the CI has will be within WMI. So you can go and check out that information and see the conditions that need to be met and all that fun stuff too, if you really want to dig in WMI. And
if you don't have this page, if you're a configuration manager administrator and you don't have this page saved, just save it. There's so many logs, it's impossible to know them all. That should have been enough time for my CI to show up. There it is, and let's evaluate it. And it's compliant right now. Let's break it a few times. Let's set it to 0. So we see it's 0. I'm gonna evaluate it again. And does it show compliant now? It shows compliant again. Let's press F5. Hey, look, it's 1 again. Let's delete it. And let's evaluate again. And there it is, and it's back, and it's 1. For old time's sake, I'm going to delete it again. And evaluate it one more time. Actually, you know what would be a fun one is if it's not a D word. Oh, I hit the zoom. Evaluate this one. There you go. All right, I'm going to make it not a D word.
You have to recreate it.
I think. Yeah. I copied the value. Let's make it a string, and it's set to banana. And let's evaluate it again. And refresh. Oh no! Error. It errors on that one. So it looks like it won't actually delete it if it exists and it's not right. Do you know why that occurs, Cody?
No, I guess I never deliberately.
Mismatch.
Oh, okay. You had it set to remediate as D word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
It will fail on a tight mismatch.
Yeah.
That's why we do it live.
Yeah, good thing to know.
I was holding the phone wrong.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And actually, that'll be very interesting. So next thing I'm going to do, so we saw how that reg key or that reg value remediation worked. And so now let's actually look at the Cody whipped up a few SQL queries for that new feature, and we're gonna actually see what the heck happened during remediation. I should have had SQL Server Management Studio open already, but go. We're going to do a new query. And paste. All right, and so this is actually going to look at. This is actually going to look at the remediation set, the remediations that have run. So here you can see we fixed it 3 times, and it gives you basically the CI version, the model name, and what the configuration baseline name was. I'm not an SQL guy, so Cody might speak a little bit more on this.
Yeah, so this was just really quick. So we, I didn't even know this table was here until I read the
table.
Oh, yeah. So I didn't realize this table view was here until just a couple days ago when I was reading through the docs. So really, I'm just taking that remediation history view and joining it off to a couple of other areas just to get some contextual information. So localized CI properties, that second of the first join is letting me grab the display name and the description of our CI. System valid is letting me grab NetBIOS name, indexed field there. And then I was actually looking at some of the built-in reports, and instead of doing like case statements, I figured out that there's the vState names view, and that was able to join that in and then do a little filter there, and then that returns, if we scroll to the right a little bit, oh no, there it is, state name, compliant. So you can get that compliance data as well, just in written word instead of the numeric value. And so we can actually see the remediation date bit there. So it's kind of nice. The use case that we're kind of thinking is, we said it's desired state, but that means that it can keep getting broken. Somebody can keep adjusting those settings, or maybe what you did is not working entirely. And so you can evaluate this data and see that you've got repeated remediation. And I think if you want to pull up the other query, and that remediation date is in UTC, by the way. That's one thing that the docs do call out, and that was good to know. So very similar query, almost identical data set here. The only difference being now.
I broke it. Oh, this is what happens when you paste in the VS Code and it thinks it's a PowerShell.
We are getting a bit close to time.
Okay.
So if you guys have like some wrapping up thoughts, let's think about that soon.
All right. I'll try to show the last one.
Yeah.
There's the
attempts. Here's the remediation attempts there. We'll have these on the GitHub again, and they'll work when you paste them the first time.
The Intune thing is pretty cool, so I want to try to show that off, Andrew, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Okay.
So go ahead, Cody. I'll stop sharing, and you can go ahead and share.
So before we hit time here, hopefully I can show this. So what we have that I mentioned was compliance policies. So if we actually go ahead and look within Configuration Manager, we have this area for compliance policies, and it does have some use cases. But more recently, in 1910, I want to say, they added this new rule type. And this rule type is specifically include configured baselines in compliance policy assessment. Now, what that ends up meaning is I can take a CI, actually a baseline rather, and I can check this box, evaluate this baseline as part of a compliance policy assessment. And so I have one condition here. Really, this is just looking for a text file. Now, what it's looking for is on my machine, I need to have in my ctemp directory a folder called vsmug.txt, which I do not have. And so if we look at my, oh, come on now, company portal, we see that I'm non-compliant. And then if we look in Software Center, it would say the same. And now the reason for that is if we look in, I really want my start menu over here. I don't know why this keeps doing this. I'm about to disconnect from this. So bizarre that as soon as I exit Remote Desktop Manager, it will not give me the header. So now if I actually pull up Software Center, we're going to see the same thing, non-compliant. And where this is coming from, though, is if I look in in Intune here, I actually have a baseline. So if I check my devices, and then I'll look at my compliance policies. And I have one that's very specific here. And sorry to go through it quick. I just thought it was really cool and did want to show it. So I have a compliance policy, and that compliance policy only has one setting set in this case, and that is right here, require device compliance from configuration manager. And I have it set to require. And so if we look at my device and we see that I'm non-compliant, and that's because I don't have that VSMUG text file. So if I pull back up my temp directory, and I'm going to go ahead and just put that file there. I'm going to pull up the applet, and I have, so here's this right here. This is the config manager compliance. That's that compliance policy. And now I also have this CI, non-compliant. I'm going to evaluate it. It is now compliant, and that is just checking for the existence. Configuration manager compliance, I'm going to evaluate that compliance policy. Now it is compliant. And then within the company portal, and this might take a sec, I'll just run these real quick.
So would this be a co-managed device, Cody, that's also an Intune?
So while this is evaluating, a couple notes. This is a co-management scenario. If you have a device that's in Configuration Manager and Intune, you can create these compliance policies. You can deploy the compliance policies from Intune that is requiring the compliance in Configuration Manager. So what it ends up being is your compliance and non-compliance for a co-managed device is sort of limitless, right? You can get as creative as you want. Like right now, me accessing company resources is relying on vsmug.txt being in my ctemp folder. And so it kind of opens things up, right? You're not just limited to AVDEF version, OS version, BitLocker. You can go as granular as you want, and you can check every single various setting. Let's say that back in the when WannaCry was there, and there was some crazy like specific file that was the kill switch for it, and you could turn that into a CI that checks for the kill switch, and that could be a condition for compliance within your environment. And so now I can access company resources. I clicked it again, but a thought there briefly. And if we are lucky within Intune as well, I'm now compliant. And that is based off of a CI baseline coming from Configuration Manager to my co-managed device, allowing me sort of infinite granularity. And the only really small tidbit I'll mention is that the docs are very specific about it when it comes to this, in that you need to make sure that, that's the wrong one, the baseline is deployed to a machine collection. Which is kind of interesting. The compliance policy is deployed to a user collection, and then the configuration baseline must be deployed to a device collection, and the docs call it out. I just don't want to dig in right here because we're pretty much at time. But I did want to make sure to show that because I thought this was really cool. Just infinite possibilities when it comes to Intune compliance and conditional access.
All right, is that everything?
I think so.
All righty, awesome session. Thanks, Andrew and Cody.